Welcome to Dynamic Drop, where darkness descends and nightmares come alive. Brace yourself for chilling tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let the horror begin.
Part 1. The Descent. I always thought I was one of the lucky ones, a man with a fulfilling job, a beautiful wife, and a little girl who could light up a room with her laughter. It felt like the kind of life you see in movies, the kind where the hero has everything to lose, and you know the fall is coming, but you can't help but hope it won't. That's how I felt, as if nothing could go wrong. But life doesn't follow a script, and it doesn't care about hope. That morning began like any other. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as I walked down the stairs. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made breakfast. I paused at the doorway, just watching her for a moment. She was beautiful, with her long brown hair tied up in a loose bun, wearing one of my old shirts. She always looked best in those, comfortable, relaxed, happy. Our daughter, Lily, was sitting at the kitchen table, her tiny hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. She was 7, and in her world, there was nothing better than a warm drink on a cool morning. She looked up as I walked in, her big brown eyes shining with that innocent joy only children possess. "Daddy!" she squealed, her face breaking into a smile that could melt the hardest of hearts. "Hey, princess," I said, ruffling her hair as I leaned down to kiss her forehead. "What's on the agenda for today?" "Mommy and I are going to bake cookies," she exclaimed, her excitement bubbling over. "And then we're going to the park." "That sounds like a perfect day," I replied, smiling as I turned to Sarah, who was watching us with a tender look in her eyes. "It is," she said softly, walking over to me and slipping her arms around my waist. "Are you sure you can't join us?" I hesitated for a moment. The thought of spending the day with my girls was tempting, more tempting than it had ever been. But duty called as it always did. "Not today," I said, trying to keep the regret out of my voice. "Big day at work, but I'll be home early, I promise." She nodded, understanding as she always did. "Just be safe, okay?" "Always," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. But deep down, I knew the risks. My job with the FBI wasn't the kind where you could guarantee safety, but it was important, and I was good at it. Too good, maybe. I kissed them both goodbye that morning, not knowing it would be the last time I'd see them in our home. The mission that day was supposed to be routine, another attempt to bring down Victor Morales, a notorious gang leader who had been eluding us for years. The man was a ghost, always one step ahead, but we had new intel that we believed would finally lead to his capture. I was leading the operation, and I was determined to make it the last. We moved in with precision, the way we always did. But from the moment we entered that warehouse, something felt off. It was too quiet, too empty. My instincts, honed by years on the job, were screaming at me to pull back, but it was too late. The first shot rang out, echoing through the vast space, and then all hell broke loose. We were ambushed, outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. The entire operation crumbled in a matter of minutes. I watched as my team, men I had trained with, fought with, trusted with my life, were cut down one by one. I tried to fight back, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with bare hands. And then I was hit. The pain was sharp, burning, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I don't know how I got out of there. It's all a blur of gunfire, shouting, and blood. When I finally made it to safety, I realized I was the only one who had. I should have died with them. Maybe it would have been better if I had. When I returned to headquarters battered and bruised, I expected some kind of debrief, maybe even a reprimand for how things had gone so wrong. What I didn't expect was the cold reception I received. The moment I walked into the office, I knew something was off. The usual camaraderie, the sense of being part of a team, was gone, replaced by stares, whispers, and a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was called into the director's office almost immediately. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. I was the scapegoat. "It's over," he said bluntly, not even bothering with pleasantries. "The mission was a disaster, and someone has to take the fall." "Someone?" I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "You're blaming me for this?" "You were in charge," he said, his tone as cold as ice. "The responsibility falls on you. We've decided it's best if you resign quietly. It'll save your career in the long run." I stared at him, trying to process what was happening. My career, my life, was being dismantled in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "Think about your family," he added, as if that would soften the blow. "This is the best option." I was numb as I left the office, the resignation papers clutched in my hand. My career was over, but I couldn't focus on that. All I could think about was Sarah and Lily. I needed to get home, to hold them, to tell them everything would be okay, even if it was a lie. But when I got home, they were gone. The house was eerily quiet, no sign of the life that usually filled it. Panic set in as I called their names, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. I checked the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the backyard. Nothing. It was like they had vanished into thin air. And then the phone rang. I scrambled to answer it, my hands shaking. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "Mr. Thompson," the voice said, "we have your family." My heart stopped. "Who is this? What do you want?" "You failed, Mr. Thompson," the voice continued, ignoring my questions. "And now you must pay the price. But don't worry, we'll make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." The line went dead before I could respond. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. My mind was racing, a million scenarios playing out, each one worse than the last. I knew it was Morales. It had to be. He was punishing me for the failed mission, for daring to come after him. I didn't know what to do, where to go, who to turn to. The FBI had abandoned me, my colleagues had turned their backs on me, and now my family was in the hands of a madman. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone silent, the house phone rang again. I lunged for it, but it wasn't the kidnappers, it was the police. They found Sarah's car abandoned on a remote road outside the city. There was no sign of her or Lily. That's when I knew. I had lost everything. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, interviews, and sleepless nights. The police did their best, but it was clear they were chasing shadows. Morales had covered his tracks too well. There was no ransom demand, no communication, nothing. It was like he had taken them and disappeared. I was falling apart, piece by piece. The house felt like a tomb, filled with the echoes of a life that no longer existed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices calling out to me. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, and there was no escape. And then, one night, I woke up in the middle of the street, disoriented, confused. I had no memory of how I got there, no idea where I was. The last thing I remembered was sitting in the living room, staring at the phone, willing it to ring. And then, nothing. I wandered for hours, trying to make sense of what was happening, but my mind was fractured, broken. I was losing myself, slipping into a darkness I didn't understand. The world around me became a blur, and I felt like I was drifting, untethered from reality. It was then that the voices began. At first they were faint, like whispers in the wind. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more insistent. They told me things, terrible things, that I had to take revenge, that I had to make them pay, all of them. Morales, the FBI, the government. They were all responsible for what had happened, and they all had to suffer. I tried to fight the voices, tried to hold on to the man I once was, but I was slipping. The pain, the grief, the anger, it was too much. I was unraveling, becoming something I didn't recognize, something I didn't want to be, but the voices wouldn't stop. They kept pushing, kept driving me towards the edge. I didn't remember how I got there, didn't know what had happened in the hours, or maybe days, that I'd lost. The last thing I remembered was being in my house, the walls closing in on me, the weight of everything crushing my chest until I could barely breathe. And then, nothing. Now here I was, surrounded by filth, the echoes of a life that had slipped through my fingers. The smell was unbearable, a mix of rotting food and something else, something worse. It clung to my skin, seeped into my clothes, as if the very air was trying to swallow me whole. My body ached, every movement sending sharp pains through my muscles and bones, but I pushed myself up, forcing my legs to carry me out of that pit. I stumbled through the streets, disoriented, my mind struggling to piece together fragments of memories that didn't seem to fit. The voices were still there, lurking in the shadows of my mind, whispering their venomous thoughts, but I tried to block them out. I needed to focus, to find my way back to some semblance of sanity, but every step felt like a battle. The city was alive with the sounds of distant traffic, people going about their lives, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I must have looked like a madman, disheveled, dirty, with wild eyes that darted around, searching for something, anything to hold on to. But there was nothing. No one. I found myself in front of a small convenience store, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. The sight of it felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. I walked inside, the cool air hitting my face like a slap, and made my way to the counter. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes and an expression that screamed indifference, barely glanced at me as I approached. "Help you with something?" he mumbled, not even looking up from his phone. For a moment, I just stared at him, the words caught in my throat. What was I supposed to say? That I had no idea how I'd ended up here? That I was losing my mind, hearing voices that told me to do unspeakable things? That my family was gone, taken by a man who had turned my life into a living nightmare? I don't know, I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. It was the truth, the only thing I was certain of anymore. The cashier gave me a strange look, like he was seeing me for the first time. There was a flash of concern in his eyes, but it quickly turned into the familiar mask of disinterest. "Look, man, if you're not going to buy anything, you should probably leave." I nodded, not really hearing him, and turned to walk out. The voices were growing louder again, gnawing at the edges of my sanity, telling me that I was wasting time, that I needed to act, to make them pay. But I didn't know what to do. I was lost. A ghost of the man I used to be, wandering through the ruins of a life that had been stolen from me. I wandered for what felt like hours, days, maybe even weeks. Time had lost all meaning. The world around me became a blur of gray, a landscape devoid of color, of hope. I was a man adrift, cut off from everything that had once anchored me. My thoughts were a tangled web of grief, rage, and confusion, with no clear path forward. And then, just as I was on the verge of giving up completely, I found something. An old, abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. It was a decrepit building, the paint peeling from the walls, the windows shattered and boarded up. But there was something about it, something that called to me. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it, as if it held the answers I'd been searching for. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty space. The inside was dark, the air thick with dust and decay, but there was a sense of peace, a quiet that I hadn't felt in a long time. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing off the walls, until I reached the altar. There, sitting on the worn wooden pew, was a single, flickering candle. I sat down beside it, the flame casting a faint glow on my face. The voices were still there, whispering in the back of my mind, but for the first time, they seemed distant, almost muted. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the flickering light, trying to find some semblance of clarity. And then, in the silence, a memory surfaced, one I had buried deep, hoping to forget. It was the last night I spent with Sarah and Lily, the night before everything fell apart. We were sitting in the living room, Lily curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed animal, Sarah resting her head on my shoulder. We didn't talk much, just enjoyed the quiet, the simple pleasure of being together. "I love you," Sarah had whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Promise me you'll always come back to us." "I promise," I had replied, kissing the top of her head, believing it with every fiber of my being. I never imagined that I wouldn't be able to keep that promise. The memory shattered the fragile peace I had found, and the rage came flooding back. I had lost them because of the choices I made, because I was too focused on my job, too blind to see the danger until it was too late. And now, they were gone, and I was left with nothing but this burning desire for revenge. I opened my eyes, staring at the candle, the flame dancing in the darkness. The voices were right. There was only one way to make this right, only one way to find peace. I had to make them pay. All of them. Morales, the FBI, the people who turned their backs on me when I needed them the most. They were all responsible for what had happened, and they would all suffer for it. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I was broken, shattered, a man hanging by a thread. I needed help, someone who understood, someone who could guide me, give me the strength I needed to see this through. And then, as if in answer to my thoughts, I heard a voice. It wasn't like the others. It was calm, soothing, almost familiar. "You're not alone," it said, the words echoing in the empty church. "There are others who feel as you do, others who have been wronged, betrayed. We can help you." I looked around, but there was no one there, just the flickering candle, the empty pews, and the darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "We are the ones who have been forgotten, cast aside by the world. But we haven't given up. We found a way to take back what was taken from us, and we can show you the way." I wanted to question it, to demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the overwhelming grief, or maybe it was the faint hope that this voice, this presence, could give me what I needed, a purpose, a way to make sense of the chaos that had consumed my life. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Trust us," the voice replied, a hint of warmth in its tone. "We'll show you the path. You'll find the strength you need to take your revenge, and when it's over, you'll be free." The candle flickered, the flame growing brighter for a moment before returning to its steady glow. I stared at it, the light reflecting in my eyes, and I knew there was no turning back. This was my path now, my destiny. I would follow it, wherever it led, because there was nothing else left for me. "Good," the voice said, as if it could hear my thoughts. "Now, get some rest. You'll need your strength for what's to come." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the pew, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I felt the tension begin to ease. The darkness was still there, waiting, but now it had a purpose, a direction. And as I drifted off to sleep, the last thing I saw was the flickering candle, a small light in the vast sea of shadows.